Sarah Chen sat at the old piano in her small apartment. Her fingers moved across the black and white keys like they were dancing. The music filled the tiny room above her family's Chinese restaurant. She had been playing this same piano for 11 years now, ever since she was 5 years old. The piano was not fancy. It was old and some keys stuck when she pressed them. The wood was scratched, and the paint was coming off in some places. But Sarah loved it more than anything in the world. Her grandmother had given it to her family before she died. Every day after school, Sarah would run up the stairs to their apartment and sit at this piano for hours. Sarah's mother would call from downstairs in the restaurant. "Sarah, come help with the dinner rush." But Sarah would beg for just 5 more minutes. Those 5 minutes always turned into an hour. Her mother understood. She knew music was Sarah's gift. At 16, Sarah could play songs that made grown people cry. She played pieces by famous composers like Chopin and Bach. These were not easy songs. They were the kind of music that took years to learn properly. Sarah's music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, always said Sarah had magic in her fingers. Mrs. Rodriguez taught piano lessons in her small studio across town. She charged very little money because she knew Sarah's family did not have much. Sarah's parents worked every day in their restaurant, saving every penny they could. Piano lessons were expensive, but they knew their daughter was special. One cold morning in February, Sarah saw a poster on the bulletin board at school. It was bright yellow, with bold black letters. "Steinway Youth Piano Competition," it said. "National competition for young pianists, ages 12 to 18. Sarah's heart started beating fast as she read the details. The competition was in the big city, 3 hours away by car. The winner would get a full scholarship to study music at a famous school. They would also get to perform with a real orchestra. Sarah had dreamed of moments like this her whole life. She ran home that day faster than she had ever run before. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, but Sarah did not care. She burst through the kitchen door, holding the poster in her hands. "Mom! Dad, look at this!" she shouted, waving the yellow paper in the air. Her mother wiped her hands on her apron and took the poster. She read it carefully, her eyes growing wide. Her father came over from the stove where he was cooking noodles. "This is a very big competition, Sarah," her mother said slowly. "Are you sure you are ready for something like this?" Sarah nodded so hard her ponytail bounced. "I have been ready my whole life, Mom. This is my chance." Her parents looked at each other. They had the same conversation with their eyes that married couples have after many years together. Sarah's father smiled first. "If this is what you want, then we will find a way," he said. The application was long and complicated. Sarah had to write essays about why she wanted to compete. She had to list all the pieces she could play from memory. She needed letters from teachers saying she was good enough for such a big competition. Mrs. Rodriguez was excited to write Sarah's letter. "I have been teaching piano for 30 years, she told Sarah's mother. "I have never had a student with Sarah's natural ability. She plays with her heart, not just her fingers." Sarah spent weeks preparing her application. She practiced her competition pieces every single day. She chose 3 songs that showed different parts of her talent. One was fast and exciting, full of notes that flew like birds. One was slow and sad, the kind that made people think about people they missed. The third was powerful and strong, like thunder rolling across the sky. Every night after the restaurant closed, Sarah would play these 3 pieces. Her parents would sit at their small kitchen table listening. Sometimes her mother would close her eyes and smile. Sometimes her father would stop reading his newspaper and just watch his daughters. Hands move. She gets lost in the music, her mother would whisper to her father. When she plays, nothing else exists. Sarah also had to send recordings of herself playing. This was the hardest part. They did not have fancy recording equipment. Her father borrowed an old video camera from a friend at work. They moved furniture around in their small living room to make space. Sarah wore her best dress, the navy blue one she wore to school concerts. The recording took all weekend. Every time Sarah made a tiny mistake, she wanted to start over. Her parents were patient. They knew this application meant everything to their daughter. "It does not have to be perfect," her mother said gently. "It just has to be you." Finally, the application was complete. Sarah put everything in a big envelope. She wrote the address very carefully in her best handwriting. The envelope was thick and heavy. It contained all of Sarah's hopes and dreams. Walking to the post office was like walking to the edge of a cliff. Sarah held the envelope tight against her chest. Her mother walked beside her, not saying anything. They both knew this moment would change everything, one way or another. The woman at the post office weighed the envelope and put stamps on it. "This must be something important," she said, seeing how carefully Sarah handed it to her. "It is my whole life," Sarah whispered. They walked home slowly. Sarah kept looking back at the post office as if she could still see her envelope sitting there. Now, all she could do was wait. Weeks passed like years. Sarah checked the mailbox every single day. She practiced her competition pieces until she could play them in her sleep. She dreamed about the big concert hall where the competition would happen. She imagined herself sitting at a beautiful grand piano, playing for hundreds of people. Mrs. Rodriguez helped Sarah get ready for what might come next. "If they accept you," she said, "you will be playing against some of the best young pianists in the country. Some of them have been taking lessons since they were tiny babies. Some of them have private teachers who cost more money in 1 month than your family makes in 3 months. This made Sarah nervous, but it also made her more determined. She knew she did not have the fancy teachers or the expensive piano lessons, but she had something else. She had music in her soul. She had years of love poured into every note she played. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah's mother called her down from her room where she was getting ready for school. "Sarah," her mother said in a strange voice, "there is a letter here for you." Sarah saw the return address and her hands started shaking. She could not open it. What if they said no? What if her dreams were about to be crushed? Her mother opened the letter for her. She read it once to herself, then looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You are going to the competition." Sarah grabbed the letter and read it 3 times to make sure it was real. They wanted her to come. They believed she was good enough. Her dreams were about to come true. The morning of the competition was cold and gray. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning, even though her alarm was set for 7. She could not sleep anymore. Today was the day she had been dreaming about for months. Sarah's mother was already awake in the kitchen, making breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled their small apartment, but Sarah's stomach was full of butterflies. She could barely eat 2 bites. "You need to eat something," her mother said, sitting down next to her. "It is a long day ahead." Sarah tried to eat, but the food felt like cardboard in her mouth. She kept thinking about all the other kids who would be at the competition. What if they were all better than her? What if she forgot her music? What if her fingers froze up when she sat at the piano? Her father came out of the bedroom, already dressed in his best suit. He only wore this suit to church and special occasions. Today felt special enough. "Are you ready, little star?" he asked, using the nickname he had called Sarah since she was small. Sarah nodded, but inside she felt like she might throw up. She went to her room to get dressed. She had bought a new dress for the competition with money she saved from helping in the restaurant. It was simple and black, the kind serious musicians wore. When she looked in the mirror, she tried to see herself as a real pianist. The drive to the city took 3 hours. Sarah sat in the back seat with her sheet music folder on her lap. It was not a fancy folder like the ones she had seen in music stores. It was just a plain black binder that her mother had bought at the office supply store. But inside were the 3 pieces she had practiced 1,000 times. Her parents tried to make conversation during the drive, but Sarah was too nervous to talk much. She kept going over the music in her head, her fingers moving silently as if she was playing an invisible piano. When they reached the city, Sarah's eyes grew wide. She had never seen buildings so tall or streets so busy. Cars honked and people walked faster than anyone walked in her small town. Everything felt huge and important. The competition was being held at the Riverside Performing Arts Center. Sarah had looked at pictures of it online, but seeing it in person took her breath away. It was a beautiful building made of white stone with tall columns in front. Red banners hung from the entrance, announcing the Steinway Youth Piano Competition. Sarah's father found a parking spot 2 blocks away. As they walked toward the building, Sarah saw other young people carrying instrument cases and music folders. These kids looked different from her. Their clothes were more expensive. Their music folders were leather and had their names printed in gold letters. Some of them had adults following them who looked like professional music teachers. "Remember," her mother said quietly as they approached the entrance, "you belong here just as much as anyone else." Inside the building, the lobby was filled with people. Parents stood in small groups talking in low voices. Kids sat in chairs practicing fingering exercises or looking over their music one last time. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing except Sarah. Sarah found a sign that said registration, with an arrow pointing down a long hallway. Her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. This was it. This was where her dream would either come true or fall apart. The registration table was set up outside the main auditorium. Behind the table sat a man in an expensive suit with gray hair and cold eyes. A small sign in front of him said, "Mr. Harrison, Competition Director." Sarah got in line behind several other students. She watched as each one approached the table. Mr. Harrison smiled at most of them, shaking hands with their parents and making pleasant conversation. He seemed to know some of the families already. When it was Sarah's turn, she stepped forward with her simple folder and her application papers. Mr. Harrison looked up at her, and his expression changed immediately. His eyes moved from her plane, dressed to her simple folder to her worn sheet music. "Name?" he asked in a flat voice, not smiling anymore. "Sarah Chen," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Harrison looked through a list on his clipboard. He found her name and put a mark next to it. Then he looked at her again, this time more carefully. Sarah could feel him judging her, deciding she did not belong there. "I'm sorry," Mr. Harrison said suddenly, "but we have reached our participant limit for today." Sarah felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. "But I have my acceptance letter," she said, pulling the letter from her folder with shaking hands. Mr. Harrison barely glanced at it. There has been a mistake. We are full. Behind. Sarah, another student, approached the table. This girl was wearing a beautiful white dress and carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Sarah's family made in a week. Her parents followed behind her, both dressed like they had just stepped out of a magazine. "Ah, Madison," Mr. Harrison said with a big smile. "We have been looking forward to your performance. Right this way." Sarah stood frozen, watching as Mr. Harrison welcomed the other girl warmly and handed her a registration packet. Other students continued to line up behind Madison, and Mr. Harrison continued to register them with smiles and friendly conversation. Sarah's mother appeared beside her. She had been watching from across the lobby and could see something was wrong. "What happened?" her mother asked quietly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she tried not to cry in front of everyone. "He says they are full, but he just registered." "That girl who came after me." Sarah's mother looked at Mr. Harrison, then at her daughter's heartbroken face. The woman who had worked 16-hour days to give her daughter this chance was getting angry. "Excuse me," Sarah's mother said, stepping forward to the registration table. Mr. Harrison looked up with annoyance. "Can I help you?" "My daughter has an acceptance letter to this competition. She has been practicing for months. How can you be full when you are still registering other students?" Mr. Harrison's face became cold and hard. "I am sorry, but the decision has been made. There is nothing I can do." Sarah watched several more students get registered after her. Each one looked like they came from money. Each one was welcomed warmly. The message was clear, even if no one said it out loud. Sarah did not look like she belonged there. Tears started rolling down Sarah's cheeks. All those months of practice, all those dreams, all the money her parents had spent on gas and the hotel room for tonight. It was all for nothing. "Come on, honey," her mother said gently, putting her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Let's go." They walked back through the lobby toward the exit. Sarah kept her head down, hoping no one would see her crying. She felt embarrassed and small and completely defeated. Her father was waiting by the entrance, holding the programs he had picked up for the competition. When he saw their faces, he knew immediately what had happened. "They would not let her compete," Sarah's mother explained, her voice tight with anger. Sarah's father looked back at the registration table. Then, at his daughter who was trying so hard not to fall apart completely. "This is not right," he said quietly. "I know it is not right," Sarah's mother replied. "But what can we do? We are nobody here." They stood outside the building for several minutes, not knowing what to do next. Sarah had never felt so disappointed in her life. She had believed that talent mattered more than anything else. She had believed that if she was good enough, she would get her chance. Now she knew that sometimes talent was not enough. Sometimes it mattered what you looked like and where you came from and how much money your parents had. "I want to go home," Sarah whispered. Her parents looked at each other. They had driven 3 hours and spent money they could not really afford on a hotel room, but they could see their daughter was heartbroken. "Are you sure?" her mother asked. "Maybe we could talk to someone else. Maybe there is another way." Sarah shook her head. She just wanted to disappear. She wanted to go back to her small apartment and her old piano and forget this day ever happened. But then her mother said something that changed everything. "Wait," she said, looking back at the building. "If we cannot get you in the competition, maybe we can at least hear what you are up against. I want to buy tickets to watch. I want to see if these other kids are really better than you." Sarah looked up at her mother in surprise. The last thing she wanted to do was sit and watch other kids live her dream. I cannot watch other people. Play my music, Sarah said. Then do not think of it as watching the competition, her mother said firmly. Think of it as research. Think of it as learning what you are going to beat next year. Next year seemed very far away, but something in her mother's voice made Sarah nod her head. They bought 3 tickets and walked into the auditorium to take their seats. Sarah had no idea that in 2 hours, she would be sitting at that same piano she was staring at from the audience. She had no idea that her biggest disappointment was about to become her greatest triumph. The auditorium was more beautiful than Sarah had imagined. Red velvet seats stretched in rows toward a stage where a magnificent black grand piano sat under bright lights. Sarah had never seen a piano so perfect and shiny. It looked like it was made of mirrors. Sarah sat between her parents in the middle section, about halfway back from the stage. Around them, families filled the seats. Parents held programs and talked quietly about their children who were competing. Sarah tried not to listen to their conversations, but she could not help hearing bits and pieces. Jennifer has been preparing for 6 months with her private teacher from the conservatory, one mother said proudly. David practiced 8 hours every day this week, another father bragged. Sarah sank lower in her seat. 8 hours a day? She was lucky if she could practice 2 hours between school and helping at the restaurant. These kids lived in a different world than she did. The lights dimmed, and a woman in an elegant evening gown walked onto the stage. She welcomed everyone to the competition and explained the rules. 24 young pianists would perform today. The judges would pick the top 6 for the final round this evening. Let us welcome our first performer, the announcer said. A boy who looked about 14 walked confidently onto the stage. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than Sarah's family spent on groceries in a month. He sat at the piano and began playing a piece by Mozart. Sarah listened carefully. The boy was good, but not amazing. His technique was clean, but his playing had no soul. It sounded like he was just playing notes, not telling a story with the music. I could play that better, Sarah whispered to herself. Her mother heard her and smiled. I know you could. The second performer was the girl in the white dress who had been registered after Sarah was turned away. Madison. She played a Chopin piece that Sarah knew very well. Madison's playing was technically perfect, but it felt cold and calculated. Every note was exactly right, but there was no emotion behind it. Sarah's hands moved slightly on her lap, following along with the music. She knew exactly how this piece should sound. She had played it hundreds of times, putting her whole heart into every phrase. One by one, the performers took the stage. Some were better than others, but Sarah noticed something about all of them. They played like they had been, taught to play perfectly, but not necessarily beautifully. Their music was correct, but not moving. They sound like robots, Sarah's father whispered during one particularly mechanical performance. Sarah found herself getting more and more frustrated as she listened. These kids had everything she did not have: expensive teachers, perfect instruments to practice on, families who could afford to travel to competitions all over the country. But they were missing something important. They were missing the love of music that Sarah had grown up with. During intermission, people stood up and stretched their legs. Sarah stayed in her seat, staring at the beautiful piano on the stage. She imagined herself sitting there, her fingers finding the keys she knew so well. She pictured playing her favorite Chopin piece, the one that always made her feel like she was flying. I need some air, her mother said, standing up. Sarah, do you want to come with me? Sarah shook her head. She wanted to stay and look at the piano. Her father went with her mother, leaving Sarah alone in her seat. The auditorium was mostly empty during intermission. A few people wandered around, looking at the programs or talking on their phones. Security guards stood near the exits, but they were not paying much attention to anything. Sarah got up from her seat and walked slowly toward the stage. She told herself she just wanted to get a closer look at the piano. But as she got nearer, she felt something pulling her forward. The piano seemed to be calling to her. There were steps on the side of the stage that led up from the audience level. Sarah looked around. No one was watching her. Before she knew what she was doing, she was climbing those steps. The stage was bigger than it looked from the audience. The piano sat in the center, gleaming under the lights. Sarah approached it slowly, like she was walking toward something magical. She had never seen a piano this beautiful up close. The wood was so polished. She could see her reflection in it. The keys were perfect white and black, not a single scratch or mark on them. This was what a real piano looked like. Sarah looked out at the empty auditorium. In an hour, this space would be full again for the second half of the competition. All those people would be watching other kids play music she knew she could play better. A crazy idea started forming in her mind. What if she just sat down and played one song? What if she showed everyone what real music sounded like? What if she proved that talent mattered more than money or fancy clothes? "You are not supposed to be up here." Sarah spun around. A security guard was walking toward her from the other side of the stage. "I am sorry," Sarah said quickly. "I was just looking." The guard's expression softened when he saw how young she was. "Are you one of the performers?" Sarah's heart sank. "No. I was supposed to be, but they said they were full." The guard looked confused. "Full? But I saw kids still registering when I came on duty." Sarah nodded sadly. "I know." The guard studied her face for a moment. Something in her expression must have told him the whole story, because his face became sympathetic. "That does not seem fair," he said gently. "It is not fair," Sarah agreed, "but there is nothing I can do about it." "What piece were you going to play?" the guard asked. "Chopin's Ballade." "Number 1 in G minor," Sarah answered without thinking. The guard's eyebrows went up. "That is a difficult piece. I played piano when I was younger." "Never got good enough for that one." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. "I have been practicing it for 2 years. It is my favorite piece in the whole world." The guard looked around the empty auditorium, then back at Sarah. "You know what? Intermission lasts 15 more minutes. Nobody is going to come back here until then." Sarah stared at him, not understanding what he was suggesting. "I did not see you up here," the guard said with a wink. "And if I happen to hear some beautiful music coming from this direction, well, that is just the building settling." Sarah's heart started beating fast. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? "I could not," she whispered. "Why not?" the guard asked. "Who is it going to hurt? You practice your piece, I get to hear some good music, and nobody ever knows it happened." Sarah looked at the piano, then at the guard, then back at the piano. Her fingers were already itching to touch those perfect keys. "What if someone hears me?" "Then they hear beautiful music," the guard said simply. "What is wrong with that?" Sarah's mother appeared at the bottom of the stage steps. She had come looking for Sarah and found her talking to the security guard on stage. "Sarah, what are you doing up there?" Sarah's mother climbed the steps and joined them on stage. The guard explained what they had been talking about. Absolutely not, Sarah's mother said immediately. We could get in trouble. Sarah could be arrested. For playing piano? The guard asked with a smile. I think that would be a first. Sarah's mother looked at her daughter's face. She could see how much. Sarah wanted this. She could see the longing in her eyes as Sarah stared at the beautiful instrument. Mom, Sarah said quietly, what if this is my only chance to play on a real piano? What if I never get another opportunity like this? Sarah's mother was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the sacrifices their family had made. She thought about the rejection at the registration table. She thought about how unfair it was that her talented daughter was sitting in the audience while less gifted kids got to perform. If you do this, her mother said slowly, you have to be prepared for whatever happens. Sarah nodded eagerly. I'm ready. The guard checked his watch. Intermission ends in 12 minutes. If you are going to do this, do it now. Sarah sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height. The keys felt smooth and perfect under her fingers. She had never played an instrument this fine before. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she was not thinking about the competition or the rejection or anything else. She was thinking only about the music. Sarah placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade. Number 1 floated through the empty auditorium like liquid gold. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with a grace and confidence she had never felt before. This piano was perfect. Every note rang clear and true, filling the huge space with rich, beautiful sound. Sarah forgot where she was. She forgot about the competition and the rejection and everything else that had happened that day. There was only the music and the story it told. The piece started quietly, almost like a whisper, then grew stronger and more passionate as it went on. The security guard stood frozen beside the piano, his mouth slightly open. He had heard thousands of people play over the years, but nothing like this. This was not just a young person playing notes. This was music that came from the soul. Sarah's mother watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. She had heard Sarah play this piece many times at home, but never like this. The perfect piano brought out sounds Sarah never could have made on their old upright. Every emotion Sarah had ever felt poured out through her fingers. People started coming back into the auditorium for the second half of the competition. The first few people stopped in the doorway when they heard the music. Instead of going to their seats, they stood and listened. More people came in behind them, creating a small crowd at the back of the auditorium. Parents who had been talking in the lobby stopped their conversations and followed the sound. Who is playing? Someone whispered. That is not part of the program, another person answered quietly. Sarah reached the most difficult part of the piece, where the music becomes fast and powerful like a storm. Her hands flew across the keys, but every note was exactly where it should be. She had practiced this section so many times that her fingers knew it by heart. More and more people filled the auditorium. Instead of taking their seats, they stood in the aisles and watched the girl on stage who was not supposed to be there. Some people started recording with their phones, sensing they were witnessing something special. In the backstage area, the official competition performers heard the music and came out to see what was happening. Madison, the girl in the white dress, pushed to the front of the group. Her face was pale as she listened to Sarah play the same Chopin piece she had performed earlier, but with 10 times more emotion and skill. "Who is that?" one of the contestants whispered. "I do not know," another answered. But she is incredible. Mr. Harrison was in his office going over the scores from the first half when his assistant rushed in. Sir, you need to come see this, the assistant said breathlessly. What is it? We need to start the second half in 5 minutes. There is a girl playing piano on stage. She is not in the competition, but the whole audience is watching her. Mr. Harrison's face turned red with anger. What? How did someone get on stage? Where is security? He rushed out of his office and toward the auditorium. He could hear the music before he even opened the doors. When he saw the crowd of people standing and watching, he became even angrier. This is unacceptable, he muttered, pushing through the crowd toward the stage. But as he got closer and could hear the music more clearly, his steps began to slow. Even Mr. Harrison, who had heard hundreds of young pianists over the years, could tell this was extraordinary playing. On stage, Sarah was nearing the end of the piece. The music became quiet again, like it was at the beginning, but now it carried all the emotion and power of everything that had come before. She played the final notes with such tenderness that several people in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. When the last note faded away, the auditorium was completely silent for several seconds. Then one person started clapping, then another. Within moments, the entire crowd was applauding louder than they had for any of the official performers that day. Sarah sat at the piano, suddenly realizing what she had just done. She looked out at hundreds of people who were all looking back at her. She saw phone cameras pointed in her direction. She saw the other contestants backstage staring at her with amazement. And she saw Mr. Harrison pushing through the crowd with a very angry expression on his face. "Young lady," Mr. Harrison called out as he approached the stage, "you are not authorized to be up there." But before he could say anything else, a woman stepped out from the group of people near the stage. She was older, with silver hair and an elegant black dress. Sarah recognized her from the program as Dr. Elizabeth Matthews, the head judge of the competition. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Matthews said in a calm but firm voice, "I think we need to talk." Dr. Matthews climbed the steps to the stage and walked over to Sarah, who was still sitting at the piano bench. "What is your name, dear?" Dr. Matthews asked kindly. "Sarah Chen," Sarah answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, that was one of the most beautiful performances of that piece I have ever heard. How old are you?" 16. Dr. Matthews turned to address Mr. Harrison, who had also come up on stage and was standing nearby with his arms crossed. "Mr. Harrison, why is this young lady not competing today?" Mr. Harrison's face was red with embarrassment and anger. "She was not selected for the competition." "Not selected?" Dr. Matthews looked confused. "But I heard her play just now. Her technique is flawless, and her musical interpretation is mature beyond her years. On what grounds was she not selected?" Mr. Harrison stumbled over his words. We had limited spots available. We had to make difficult choices." Sarah's mother stepped forward from where she had been standing beside the piano. "That is not true," she said clearly. "My daughter had an acceptance letter. When we arrived for registration this morning, Mr. Harrison told us they were full, but then he continued to register other students who arrived after us." A murmur went through the crowd that had gathered to listen. Dr. Matthews's expression became very serious. "Is this true, Mr. Harrison?" Mr. Harrison looked around at all the faces staring at him. He saw the other judges who had come to see what was happening. He saw parents with their phones out, recording everything. He saw the contestants backstage who had heard every word. "There may have been some confusion," he said weakly. Dr. Matthews looked at Sarah, then at her mother, then back at Mr. Harrison. As the head judge, she had final authority over all decisions regarding the competition. There has indeed been some confusion, she said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. But I intend to correct it right now. She turned to face Sarah directly. Sarah Chen, I am formally inviting you to compete in the final round of this competition this evening. Your performance just now demonstrated that you absolutely belong here. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah felt like she might faint from shock and joy. Her mother grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. Mr. Harrison looked like he wanted to object, but he was surrounded by hundreds of witnesses who had just heard everything. Several of the other judges were nodding in agreement with Dr. Matthews's decision. But she has not been through the proper process, Mr. Harrison protested weakly. She just auditioned for us, Dr. Matthews replied firmly, and it was the best audition I have seen all day. Sarah stood up from the piano bench on shaking legs. Everything was happening so fast she could barely process it. The final round begins in 2 hours, Dr. Matthews told Sarah. That gives you time to prepare. Can you be ready? Sarah looked at her mother, who was smiling through her tears. She looked at the beautiful piano where she had just played the performance of her lifetime. She looked at all the people who were still applauding for her. Yes, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I can be ready. As the crowd began to disperse and people took their seats for the second half of the preliminary round, Sarah remained on stage with her parents and Dr. Matthews. You have a very special gift, Dr. Matthews told her. Do not let anyone ever tell you that you do not belong somewhere because of how you look or where you come from. Talent speaks louder than anything else. Sarah nodded, still feeling like she was in a dream. In 2 hours, she would be back on this stage, competing officially for the title she had dreamed of winning. But she had already won something more important. She had proven that music truly did have the power to change everything. The 2 hours between Sarah's impromptu performance and the final round felt like the longest and shortest time of her life. She sat in a small practice room backstage, trying to calm her nerves and prepare for what was about to happen. Her parents sat with her, hardly believing what they had witnessed. Their daughter, who had been rejected that morning, was now preparing to compete against the best young pianists in the country. How do you feel? Her mother asked. Sarah flexed her fingers and thought about the question. Scared, she admitted, but also ready. I have been ready for this my whole life. A volunteer knocked on the practice room door. 5 minutes until the final round begins, she announced. Sarah's father stood up and hugged his daughter. No matter what happens out there, we are proud of you. You have already shown everyone what you can do. Sarah nodded and picked up her simple black folder. Inside were the same 3 pieces she had prepared months ago. She had planned to play the Chopin Ballade for the final round if she made it that far. Now, after playing it during intermission, she wondered if she should choose something different. But as she walked toward the stage, she decided to stick with her original plan. The Chopin piece was part of her heart. It was the music that had gotten her this far. The auditorium was completely full now. Word had spread during the afternoon about the girl who had played from the audience and earned her way into the finals. Some people had even come just to see what would happen next. Dr. Matthews stood at the podium to introduce the final round. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 6 exceptional young musicians competing tonight. Each will perform one piece of their choosing. She read the names of the finalists. When she got to Sarah's name, the applause was noticeably louder than for the others. Our first finalist is Madison Williams, Dr. Matthews announced. Madison walked onto the stage in her perfect white dress. She sat at the piano and played a difficult piece by Rachmaninoff. Her performance was technically excellent, just as it had been in the morning. Every note was in the right place at the right time. But Sarah noticed the same thing she had observed earlier. Madison's playing was cold and calculated. It impressed the mind but did not touch the heart. When Madison finished, the audience applauded politely. Madison took her bow and walked off stage, looking confident that she had done well. The next 4 performers were all very good. Each one played challenging pieces with skill and precision. The level of competition was higher than Sarah had expected. These were truly some of the best young pianists in the country. Finally, Dr. Matthews called Sarah's name. "Our final performer tonight is Sarah Chen." Sarah walked onto the stage with her head held high. She was no longer the scared girl who had been turned away at registration that morning. The afternoon had changed her. She belonged here, and everyone in the auditorium knew it. She sat at the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height, just as she had done during intermission. But this time she was not sneaking onto the stage. This time, she was here by right. Sarah looked out at the audience. She could see her parents in the 5th row, her mother clutching her father's hand. She could see Dr. Matthews and the other judges at their table near the front. She could see the other contestants watching from the wings, but most importantly, she could see Mr. Harrison sitting in the front row with his arms crossed, still looking angry about everything that had happened. Sarah smiled to herself. She was about to show him exactly what he had tried to keep out of his competition. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play the Chopin Ballade for the 2nd time that day. From the very first notes, everyone could tell this performance was going to be different from the earlier one. Sarah was no longer playing with the desperation of someone who might never get another chance. Now she was playing with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged. The music filled the auditorium, like water filling a glass. Every person in every seat could feel the emotion pouring from Sarah's fingers. This was not just piano playing. This was storytelling through music. Sarah had played this piece hundreds of times, but never like this. The perfect piano brought out colors and textures in the music she had never heard before, and knowing that she was finally where she was supposed to be gave her a freedom she had never felt. The quiet beginning gave way to more complex passages. Sarah's hands danced across the keys with an ease that made the most difficult parts look effortless. She was not thinking about technique or finger positions or any of the mechanical aspects of playing. She was simply letting the music flow through her. In the audience, people sat transfixed. Many had heard this piece performed before, but never with such passion and understanding. Some audience members closed their eyes and let Sarah's interpretation wash over them. Others watched her hands move, amazed at how such young fingers could create such mature music. The other contestants watched from backstage with expressions of awe and admiration. They recognized immediately that they were witnessing something special. This was the level of playing they all aspired to reach. Even the judges, who had heard thousands of performances over the years, found themselves leaning forward in their seats. Dr. Matthews had tears in her eyes as she listened to Sarah transform the familiar piece into something completely new and wonderful. Sarah reached the climactic section of the piece where the music becomes powerful and dramatic. Her whole body moved with the rhythm as her hands flew across the keys. Every note rang out with clarity and purpose. The audience was completely silent except for the music. No one coughed or shifted in their seats. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, afraid to disturb the magic happening on stage. As Sarah moved into the final section of the piece, she played with a tenderness that made the simple melody sound like a lullaby. She was no longer performing for judges or trying to win a competition. She was sharing a piece of her soul with everyone in that auditorium. The last notes faded away into perfect silence. For several long seconds, no one moved. The silence stretched on as everyone processed what they had just experienced. Then one person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium exploded into applause. People jumped to their feet, giving Sarah a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Sarah sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had never heard applause like this before. It was not just appreciation for good playing, it was recognition of something truly extraordinary. She stood up and took a bow, then walked off stage on shaking legs. Backstage, the other contestants surrounded her with congratulations. Even Madison, who had seemed so confident earlier, looked humbled. "That was incredible," Madison said sincerely. "I have never heard anyone play like that." The judges took 30 minutes to deliberate, but everyone in the auditorium already knew what the result would be. Sarah's performance had been in a different league from everything else they had heard that day. When Dr. Matthews returned to the podium to announce the results, the audience fell silent. "The judges have reached a unanimous decision," she began. "This year's winner of the Steinway Youth Piano Competition is Sarah Chen." The auditorium erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah's parents jumped out of their seats, hugging each other and crying with joy. Sarah herself felt like she was floating as she walked back onto the stage. Dr. Matthews placed a gold medal around Sarah's neck and handed her a bouquet of flowers. But more importantly, she handed her an envelope containing the full scholarship to the Music Conservatory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Matthews said into the microphone, "I have been judging piano competitions for 25 years. I have never heard a performance that moved me as much as what we witnessed tonight. Sarah Chen represents everything that is beautiful about music and everything that is right about giving talented young people the opportunities they deserve." The applause continued for several more minutes. When it finally died down, Dr. Matthews handed the microphone to Sarah. Sarah looked out at the audience, then at her parents beaming in the 5th row, then at Mr. Harrison, who was clapping along. With everyone else, his earlier anger replaced by what looked like shame. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "This morning, I thought my dream was over before it even began. But I learned today that if you have something important to say, the world will find a way to listen. Music is the most important thing I have to say, and I will spend the rest of my life saying it." The audience gave her one final standing ovation as she walked off stage, medal around her neck and scholarship in her hand. Later that evening, as Sarah and her parents drove home through the dark, Sarah's mother asked, "How does it feel to be a champion?" Sarah thought about the question as she watched the lights of the city disappear behind them. She thought about the morning's rejection, the afternoon's triumph, and the evening's victory. "It feels like the beginning," she said finally. And it was. Sarah's performance that day had been recorded by dozens of people on their phones. Within hours, videos of her playing were spreading across the internet. Music schools and teachers around the country were talking about the girl who had played her way from the audience to first place. But for Sarah, the real victory was not the medal or the scholarship or the fame that would follow.